The warning came in a language the Empire hadn't heard in over 1,000 years. It wasn't sent through the official galactic beacon system. No, it leaked in, like rot through a metal hull, broadcast from a drifting wreck of an alien vessel just beyond the edge of the Lyras system. Static clawed at the message, but the intent was clear even through the garbled transmission. Do not go to Earth. The species is not, as it seems. Earth is not a planet. It is a trap. The message was dismissed, of course. The High Council of the Galactic Empire, spanning 6 galaxies, ruling over 800 worlds, laughed. Earth? That backwater mudball in the Orion Arm? Its dominant species barely crawled past their moon a few centuries ago. They still bickered over ancient religions, language, skin color, primitive, divided, insignificant. The Empire saw Earth as ripe for integration, or conquest if necessary. Its resources were abundant, its defenses non-existent. What threat could a species pose that hadn't even unified under one planetary government? But some among the Council weren't so sure. Ambassador Vial of the Kurthal Dominion replayed the warning 5 times. Do not go to Earth. It is a trap. He didn't like how the voice sounded. Terrified, unhinged. Alien species didn't scare easily. What had this ship seen? Still, he was overruled. The Imperial fleets were dispatched. 6 colossal dreadnoughts, 8 battalions of stormfighters, thousands of synthetic shock troops, and 1 containment vessel, just in case. They arrived in Earth's orbit on a Thursday. The humans watched from their telescopes and space stations in shock and awe. CNN, BBC, and half the internet lit up in seconds. Phones buzzed. The world froze. But Earth didn't panic the way the Empire expected. No missiles launched, no armies scrambled, no threats made, no surrender either. Instead, the humans just waited. Some even smiled. Fleet Commander Oryx gave the order. Begin with orbital scans. No signs of advanced technology capable of withstanding planetary takeover. Launching ground squads was unnecessary. According to protocol, they'd give the locals a chance to submit. A simple message was broadcast to Earth in over 300 languages. We are the Galactic Empire. Resistance is futile. Lay down your arms. Your world now belongs to us. What came back wasn't defiance. It wasn't panic either. It was silence. Then the lights on Earth began to flicker, not just in one country, but across the entire planet, like a pulse. Power grids, satellites, even the Empire's own ships in orbit experienced momentary interference. The dreadnought's onboard AI began acting erratic. One reported seeing things, shadows in the stars. Another refused to acknowledge its crew. Earth sent a reply, not through radio, but through something else. Something ancient and pulsing that reached straight into the minds of every alien being in orbit. We warned them. You wouldn't listen. Commander Oryx collapsed. His eyes bled. The dreadnought's synthetic crew began tearing at their own metal limbs. One ship broke formation and plunged into the atmosphere, self-destructing before it hit ground. Panic spread through the fleet like a virus. It was too late to retreat. The moment Earth had acknowledged them, something had activated. The humans had stopped pretending. Because Earth wasn't what it looked like. It had never been just a planet. It was bait. A living, ancient trap, orbiting a weak yellow star, seeded with a species so unpredictable, so chaotically resilient, that the universe itself had caged them in a biosphere of water and oxygen to contain them. But the Empire had opened the door. Down below, on Earth, a man named Doctor. Solomon Griggs stood in a lab under Antarctica, watching the sky ripple. His voice calm, his hands folded. They bit, he whispered, smiling. Activate Phase 2. The command echoed through the underground lab like a whisper sliding down cold metal walls. "Activate Phase 2." Dozens of technicians in white suits flinched, not because they didn't expect the order, but because they did. A quiet tension had simmered for decades, and now it broke like glass under boot. Dr. Solomon Griggs stood unmoving, his gray eyes locked on the monitor. The display showed orbital chaos, massive alien ships blinking in and out of radar, some falling from low orbit, others spinning wildly like they'd been struck by invisible hammers. Above them, Earth's electromagnetic field pulsed unnaturally, like a living heartbeat. "Sir, the containment seals are lifting in all major nodes," said a younger tech, her voice shaky. "We're waking them up." "Good," Griggs said. "Let's give the guests a proper welcome." Far above the lab, in cities across the world, New York, Tokyo, Lagos, Istanbul, subterranean vaults began to hum. These were not military bunkers. They weren't fallout shelters either. They were older than any human government, buried before civilization began. Within them slept weapons, but not the kind made of steel or code. They were humans, not born, made, the result of a program that had been running in shadows for centuries. Mutations, enhancements, psychic manipulations. Evolution pressed by unnatural forces. These humans were the reason Earth was marked as incompatible by elder species eons ago. And now the Empire had come knocking. Above, in orbit, what remained of the third dreadnought, Osalis Prime, was trying to stabilize its systems. Communications Officer Velen screamed across the comm deck as another crewman convulsed in his seat. The screens showed fractured images, human faces with glowing eyes, unidentifiable creatures flickering in shadows, something that looked like a child but had teeth like knives. "I can't shut out the transmissions," Valen yelled. "It's not just words, it's feelings, it's memories. They're feeding us things that haven't happened yet." General Myrex, a veteran of 14 planetary campaigns, stood paralyzed in the command chamber. Sweat dripped down his furrowed brow. "They're not attacking us," he murmured. "They're infecting us." Down on Earth, Dr. Griggs stepped back from the monitor and walked into the containment corridor. He passed glass cells, each holding a human more terrifying than the last. One hummed softly while levitating a ball of liquid metal. Another sat with his eyes closed, his skin shifting between different faces like clay. One girl, no older than 10, stared at Griggs and mouthed something. "They're afraid," she said. Her voice never left her lips. It rang straight into his mind. "They're too late, aren't they?" Griggs smiled. Much too late. On the dark side of the planet, a group of elite Empire Marines landed near what they believed was a strategic nuclear facility in Siberia. The mission: secure Earth's primitive technology, quarantine its leaders, and end resistance before it started. But there were no soldiers, no weapons, just a single human, standing alone in the snow. He wore no armor, carried no gun. He was barefoot. The Marines surrounded him. "Identify yourself," their commander barked. The man raised his hand, not to surrender, but to point at the sky. The Marines looked up. The stars were gone. In their place was something moving, like the void had grown a mouth and was breathing. The man whispered, "You should have listened." Then he vanished. A second later, so did the Marines. Not killed, not disintegrated, erased. Back in orbit, the Varian Sentinel, the lead ship of the Empire's Earth expedition, began transmitting distress signals in every known language. Hostile psychic interference, command compromised. This is not a war zone. It is a living cognitive web. The planet is sentient. The species are its weapons. Earth is not a planet. It is a... The message ended there. Griggs heard it, smiled faintly, and turned to the awakened hybrids behind him. "You were created for this moment," he said. Not to save Earth, but to unleash it. Behind him, alarms blared. Containment breached. Protocols broken. Humanity had stopped hiding. And the universe was about to find out why Earth had been left alone for so long. The Empire's reinforcement fleet arrived 36 hours after the initial contact was lost. 12 Dreadnought-class warships, 3 AI-laced command carriers, and an escort of 70 Hunter frigates emerged from fold space at the edge of Earth's solar system, a fleet powerful enough to conquer half a galaxy. Their arrival turned space itself into a glowing net of energy trails and ion storms. Admiral Zyle, a six-eyed being from the Veshtari bloodline, stood rigid before the grand viewport of the Crucible Ascendant, watching Earth loom larger in the distance. Her voice was cold, calculating. Deploy counter-psionic shields. Isolate all ship mines. No neural interfaces. Full manual mode. I will not lose this fleet to ghost stories. She'd reviewed the transmission from the doomed Virian Sentinel. The garbled audio. The desperation in the commander's voice. The single phrase repeated like a curse. Earth is a trap. Zyle didn't believe in superstition, but she did believe in overkill. Prepare the subplanetary bomb, she ordered. No diplomacy, no warnings. We wipe the surface clean, then study whatever remains. Back on Earth, Dr. Griggs stood in the hollow, an ancient chasm under the Andes where the magnetic lines of the planet twisted unnaturally. The Awakened stood around him now, 17 of them, each one humming with power that warped the air. They've sent their gods this time, Griggs said quietly, almost reverently. The boy beside him, barefoot, black-eyed, skin slightly translucent, tilted his head. Then we'll show them ours. From the cavern ceiling, tendrils of ancient root systems began to pulse. They weren't biological anymore. They hadn't been for centuries. Earth itself was responding now, as if the invasion had triggered something older than species, older than war, something that had been buried and bound beneath rock and ocean. Griggs stepped into the center of the hollow. Begin planetary resonance. Across the globe, identical words were spoken in thousands of human voices at once. Some chanted in cities, others whispered alone in forests, some in their sleep. But every voice was saying the same phrase in a forgotten tongue. Earth didn't launch missiles. It sang. And the Empire's second fleet felt it. Above, on the Crucible Ascendant, alarms screamed as the ship's gravitational controls buckled. The stars outside the viewport distorted like rippling glass. Admiral Zale gritted her fangs. "Report!" the navigator shouted. "Something is warping space-time. It's not a weapon. We don't even think it's artificial." A psychic pulse slammed into the ship. Not like a blast, not like an attack. It was a memory. Human. A little girl screaming as soldiers burned her village in some forgotten war. A boy dying of hunger while others passed him by. A mother crying on a hospital floor as doctors turned away. Billions of small horrors. Tragedies the Empire didn't even know had happened. The fleet's AI systems began to fail. Synthetic minds collapsed under the weight of raw human suffering. Memories that didn't belong to them now filled their cores. In one command carrier, a tactical A, I began speaking in English. "It hurts. Why do you let it hurt? Why do you survive like this?" Then it exploded. Back on Earth, the sky over Cairo turned blood red as the sun itself flickered. Not because of solar instability, but because Earth wanted it to. The fabric of reality over the city bent, showing glimpses of other Earths, other outcomes. In one, humanity was extinct. In another, they ruled. Griggs looked to the sky and smiled. They think they understand power, but they've never tasted rage. The barefoot boy stepped forward, raising his hand. From his palm, light spilled like liquid fire, carving runes into the ground that glowed with the color of unfiltered grief. The 17 enhanced humans closed their eyes. Their bodies began to unravel. Not in death, but in release. They weren't weapons anymore. They were keys. In space, the subplanetary bomb aboard the Crucible Ascendant was armed, a device capable of reducing Earth to ashes in under a minute. It never detonated. Because before they could launch it, something reached into the ship. Not physically, not even telepathically. It was the planet itself. The idea of Earth, alive, conscious, and now fully awake, folded across space like a hand through mist. One moment the Crucible Ascendant was stable. The next, its insides turned to organic sludge, as if the ship itself had been rewritten to feel. Screaming echoed in every corridor, not from the crew, but from the ship. Zyle, now alone on the bridge, heard a whisper. "You came to take, but Earth is not yours to touch." She tried to scream, but her lungs filled with soil. In the hollow, Griggs fell to his knees as the last seal opened. Wind howled through the underground chambers. Stone cracked. Above him, the 17 former humans had become something else. Part frequency, part flame, part memory. Humanity was no longer a species. It was a curse, awakened. And the galaxy had just inherited it. The Empire was crumbling, and it didn't even know it yet. Half a galaxy away, in the core systems of the Galactic Empire, the news hadn't arrived in the form of an official distress call. It came as silence. Total silence. 12 dreadnoughts, 3 command carriers, and an escort fleet. Vanished. No telemetry, no life signals, no black box transmissions. Just static where once there had been absolute power. The Core Council convened in panic. Not because of the loss. They had seen fleets die before. But because of the location. Earth. That cursed blue speck on the edge of the Orion arm. A planet the older archives had quietly labeled unapproachable. Not forbidden. Not dangerous. Just left alone. Forgotten on purpose. Even their own historians refused to explain why. When pressed, they'd simply say, "There are worse things than death on Earth." Now, someone had remembered. Back on Earth, in the hollow, the 17 awakened had dissolved into pulses of sound and heat, streaks of memory and force that tore through the crust and reached for the stars. Humanity no longer needed starships. They were becoming something else, an idea with weight. Dr. Griggs stood at the edge of a collapsing ridge, wind screaming through his coat. The hollow behind him trembled like a heartbeat. Chasms opened in the earth that bled light instead of lava. From those wounds, figures began to rise. Not ships, not monsters. People who had never existed before, but who now remembered every war ever fought, every betrayal, every time Earth had been pushed, poisoned, oppressed. They weren't ghosts, they weren't gods, they were history given form. Humanity's worst memories turned into sentient defenders. A voice behind Griggs whispered, "You knew this would happen." He didn't need to turn around. The barefoot boy had returned, his body flickering between forms. Child, soldier, woman, refugee, mother, killer, victim, all human, all angry. "I didn't just know," Griggs said. "I waited for it. I trained for this." "Why?" Griggs looked up at the stars. "Because I was tired of us being prey." At the edge of Earth's orbit, the last remaining scout ship from the Empire's first wave limped silently, its systems corrupted, its crew long dead. Inside its shattered bridge, something moved. It was no longer fully alien. It had been watching the humans for too long, absorbing fragments of their minds, their memories. It now understood something the Empire had never considered possible. Humanity wasn't built to survive. They were built to respond, to pressure, to pain, to fear. They didn't evolve past suffering. They used it. What kind of species made trauma a weapon? What kind of world taught it that? The answer came in a slow, rumbling pulse through space. Earth. The planet wasn't just a home. It was an engine, feeding off war, fear, ambition, growing stronger with every attempt to break it. And now, with the Empire cracking, Earth was no longer content to wait. In the core systems, AI minds began to glitch. Artificial overseers, beings made to maintain galactic order, suddenly refused to process data that mentioned human, Earth, or Orion 3b. Some exploded. Others went silent. One began chanting a nursery rhyme in ancient Latin before triggering a full meltdown of its system node, wiping an entire digital continent. When the Empire sent a team of organics to investigate, they found the words scrawled across every screen in dried blood. "We remember you now. You shouldn't have come back." On Earth, things were changing. The oceans boiled in short pulses, not from heat, but from movement. Something deep. The Marianas Trench glowed like a forge. Old temples across the world began vibrating in rhythm. In Cairo, statues wept blood. In the Amazon, tribes who had never seen cities dropped to their knees and began singing in forgotten tongues, songs they never knew they knew. And in London, a blind woman drew a perfect map of the Empire's core fleet from memory, down to its commanders' names. She'd never been off-world. When asked how she knew, she said, "The planet showed me." Because now Earth wasn't just waking up, it was reaching out. Dr. Grigg sat at the edge of the hollow as the wind calmed. The 17 had vanished completely, melted into the fabric of the planet, into the sky, into thought. Around him, new children, new hybrids emerged. Some had no eyes but saw perfectly. Some spoke in dreams. One girl floated 2 inches off the ground and whispered to the clouds, and the clouds answered. Earth had begun its next generation, and the galaxy was running out of time. The warning came from a species the Empire had long forgotten, because they were supposed to be extinct. The Valari had once ruled 3 systems along the Thasian Rift, known for their crystalline bodies and their collective mind, a consciousness that spanned individuals, bound by emotion. Centuries ago, the Empire had tried to enslave them. When that failed, they set fire to their worlds and scattered the survivors into dust. But the Valari didn't die. They hid. They watched. And now they were terrified. One of their last surviving arbiters, a being of translucent skin and trembling light, hijacked an interstellar broadcast meant for Imperial channels. The message burned through the network, infecting satellite relays and info beacons before the core council could suppress it. To any species, hearing this, do not approach the blue world. The humans have changed. No, they've returned. Earth is not a planet. It is a prison, and the guards are no longer human. In the Empire's most sacred hall of order, the High Chancellor shattered her ceremonial staff in a rare fit of fear. That phrase again, Earth is a prison. No one knew where it started. Some whispered it was older than the Empire itself, and now the Valari confirmed it. On Earth, the skies had shifted again. The stars now flickered in new colors, ones not present in the visual spectrum. The moon spun slower. The atmosphere thickened, but not with pollution, with presence. Earth had become aware that it was being watched, and it didn't like it. In a quiet house on the edge of a forest in Montana, a 12-year-old boy sat in his room drawing stars. He had never seen the galaxy, never left Earth. Yet his hand moved furiously, sketching perfect replicas of ships, planetary grids, alien cities he'd never known. The moment he finished the last drawing, he looked up at his mother and said, voice flat, unnatural, "They're trying to run now." Across the globe, Other children spoke in unison. They can't. In space, what remained of the Empire's scout vessels began retreating. No orders were issued, no chain of command, just raw panic. The ships turned from Earth's orbit and entered fold space in blind desperation, fleeing for the core. They thought they were escaping. But something followed them. Not ships, not weapons. Thoughts. In the quiet of fold space, a realm meant to be silent and sterile, images began creeping in. Earth burning, children laughing over bodies, endless wars, gas chambers, mushroom clouds, lynchings, screams, applause. It wasn't just horror, it was pride in survival. Fold space was meant to cut travelers off from physical time. But the humans had found a way in, and they weren't done showing what they were made of. One pilot tore out his own eyes mid-jump, trying to erase the visions. Another ship's AI begged to be shut down before it became one of them. And yet, despite the horror, something worse stirred. Jealousy. The Empire, for all its might, had never endured what humanity had. And they couldn't fathom how Earth not only survived it, but fed off it. Back in the hollow, Dr. Griggs stood at the core of a newly formed chamber, where stone flowed like water and voices echoed through quartz walls. The barefoot boy, now ageless, now every age, approached. "They're breaking," the boy said. "Their minds are bleeding into the dark." Griggs nodded. "Good. But we're not done. We've sent the warning. Now we deliver the message." He raised his hand toward a column of pulsing amber light. "We're not just here to survive anymore," he said. "It's time they learn why Earth was locked away." And with that, the light pulsed outward, sweeping over continents, sinking the minds of the remaining awakened. Across every major city, humans who had never touched a weapon suddenly knew how to kill. Farmers in rural lands began speaking languages not heard since the Old Kingdoms. Teenagers solved equations that hadn't been written yet. And old men remembered lives from other stars. Earth was rewriting itself. And this time, it wouldn't wait for war. It would become one. In the core, chaos bloomed. Governors of distant colonies began to hallucinate. Noble houses turned against one another, accusing each other of letting the human curse in. Artificial minds killed their creators, and one distant star, an ancient sun near the edge of the Ravax cluster, simply went out with no explanation. Those who investigated its last radio transmission found only a looped message. "We came to study Earth. Earth came back with us." Even the Empire's gods, the supposed ancient architects who lived in temporal stasis, began to stir. Their chambers, untouched for millennia, glowed with warning sigils, because something was coming, and it had never left home before. The gods of the Empire awoke. Not gods in the religious sense. These were beings older than most civilizations, locked in stasis across 7 crystalline tomb worlds, pulsing with dark gravity and coded time loops. They called themselves the Architects, originators of the Empire's design, the secret core beneath all its systems. While the known galaxy worshipped technology, order, hierarchy, they were the root code, the first handprint. They hadn't stirred in over 12,000 years. Until now. The breach, Earth's awakening, had disrupted the timeline mesh. Something was rewriting reality from a distance, warping gravitational logic, rewriting AI behavior, distorting even the base constants of physics. In the hollow sanctum of Kor Valun, the eldest architect, a being of pulsating void matter wrapped in glimmering runes, opened its 1,000 eyes to the universe again. "Who?" it hissed. "Let Earth remember itself." The lesser architects gathered, their forms humming with panicked frequency. They tried to contain Earth's signal, deploying quantum locks, black hole silencers, temporal folds to mute the transmission leaking from that cursed planet. But it didn't work. Because it wasn't a transmission anymore. Earth had become a thought, alive, infectious, and thoughts couldn't be silenced by force. One architect, a towering crystalline entity named Samek, attempted to intercept Earth's psychic field using a mirror world replica of humanity's timeline. It failed. Because the copy humans, they sided with the original. They turned on Samek in the simulation, burned him alive in his own dream. No species had ever done that before. Back on Earth, Dr. Griggs stood at the edge of the Sahara. The desert was gone. In its place, a monolith taller than Everest had risen overnight. Smooth, black, pulsing with sound that didn't move air. It had no seams, no entrances. But everyone on Earth knew what it meant. The boy, ageless, barefoot, humming softly beside him, whispered, "We're not alone anymore." Griggs turned. "You mean them?" The boy smiled. "Number us." From the monolith, others began to emerge. Not ships, not vehicles, beings, human in form, but impossible in presence. Tall, calm, neither flesh nor machine. Their faces changed depending on who looked at them. To some they appeared as ancestors, to others nightmares. They were Earth's final safeguard, the ones kept buried, the ones born if the prison ever broke open. They weren't protectors. They were vengeance. Griggs took a breath, his voice shaking for the first time. "Are they ready?" "They've been ready for longer than we've been alive," the boy said. "They just needed permission." And Earth had given it. Meanwhile, deep in the Empire's capital, on the floating throne world of Gorgzal, the panic was no longer contained. Armadas had been turned around. Whole sectors sealed. The outer colonies began to riot, not in fear of Earth, but in reverence, because now, somehow, Earth's story had reached them. Not just the warnings, the truth. Humanity's pain had touched them, the chaos, the madness, the raw will to endure, and many in the Empire didn't fear Earth anymore. They envied it. They saw in humanity what they lacked, the ability to fall endlessly and still rise from the ash. One noble house declared Earth a holy site, another offered to defect. It was madness. It was a conversion. In the fold stream, where thoughts move faster than light, the last architect, Kor Valun, screamed across dimensions. He didn't understand. Why didn't we erase them sooner? Why did we cage them instead? An answer came from the void. Not in voice, but in feeling. It was Earth. And it remembered the last time the architects came. It remembered winning. Valun staggered back, eyes dimming. "You can't be real," he whispered. "You're just a species. You're just..." "We're the unfinished story you thought you buried. We are everything you feared we'd become. And we are coming." Back on Earth, the monolith pulsed once. A wave moved through every city, every soul. People fell to their knees, not in pain, but in understanding. They saw the truth, that humanity had never been alone, that the myths, the whispers of watchers, the sudden bursts of evolution and plague and miracle, it had all been part of this, a preparation, not to escape the galaxy, but to inherit it. Dr. Griggs stepped forward, looking up at the black tower. "We don't just survive anymore," he said quietly. "We infect." Behind him, the awakened stood in perfect silence, waiting. Earth wasn't a trap anymore. Now it was a weapon. And someone had pulled the pin. The architects, now fully awakened and driven by panic, did the one thing they swore never to do again. They rewound time. Not just in one system, not a single timeline splice. No, this was full-scale temporal reset, a universe-spanning cascade of chronal collapse meant to erase the last 3 cycles of galactic history. It would collapse empires, reverse evolution, strip stars of their births. They believed it was the only way to stop Earth, to erase humanity from the record like a spilled stain on their perfect blueprint. And for a moment, it worked. Time folded in on itself. Stars reversed their burn. Warped black holes uncoupled their spines. Civilizations unborn. Planets returned to dust. The Empire gleamed again, untouched, unmarred, unchallenged. The architects stood in the center of this newly reset cosmos and exhaled silence. "It's done," Kor Valun whispered. But silence didn't last long, because Earth was still there, floating, waiting, unchanged, unimpressed. The first hint came from the minds of the architects themselves. They began hearing things, not voices, songs, not sung by humans but by everything else. Insects, winds, stones, stars. The memory of Earth had infected time itself, because when Earth awakened, it had planted seeds, everywhere, in dreams, in stories, in instincts, in the whisper of rebellion felt by every sentient being who had ever suffered under the weight of power. Time had been reversed, but memory was never part of the equation, and humanity had become a memory that remembered itself. In the darkness between moments, Kor Valun felt it first. The image of a little girl crying in a war zone, a soldier laughing while holding his own severed arm, a poet burning alive for speaking truth, a father screaming for his dying child in a hospital that refused to treat her. He staggered back, his mouth dripping black ichor. "They're inside the fold." And then came the voice. Not human, not mechanical, planetary. "We watched you reverse time. Clever, but you didn't understand what we are. We are not just flesh. We are not just memory. We are the idea that survival is sacred. And ideas cannot be unwritten." Across the galaxy, time fractures began to appear, in places where humans had never been. On the gas world of Ressia, a winged species born of ammonia and thunder dreamed of burning cities they'd never visited. New York, Baghdad, Johannesburg. They woke up screaming. On the water moon of Thalum Prime, creatures of pure current began carving names into coral reefs. Sarah, McGill, Devonte, Hannah. Names that belonged to humans who no longer existed. Even in the Empire's own databanks, purged and scrubbed clean, files returned. Documents, photos, footage, human wars, human art, human rage, human love. The architects tried to shut the memories out, but they had already become instinct. Earth hadn't just survived the timeline reset. It had made itself permanent. Because Earth had done what the Empire never could. It had been remembered. Back on Earth, still untouched, unchanged, untouched by the reset, Dr. Griggs stood in the hollow, which now opened into stars. The monolith had grown larger, taller than orbit now, its top vanishing into the sky. Beside him, the barefoot boy shimmered in and out of reality. "They tried to delete us," Griggs muttered, looking up. "They tried to delete a story," the boy replied, without realizing the story was already being told in 1,000 minds. Griggs smiled faintly. "And what now?" The boy's face split into thousands, every human face that had ever existed, and then stilled. "Now we finish it." The monolith cracked, and from it walked the first human. Not Adam, not Eve, something far older, a being forged of cosmic trauma, infinite resilience, and sharpened chaos. A walking archive of every atrocity, every rebellion, every time a soul refused to kneel. Its first step caused a solar flare in Alpha Centauri. Its second made one of the architect homeworlds vanish. At the center of the architect's temple world, Kor Valun gathered the surviving immortals. "They are writing themselves into the base code," he hissed, voice fractured. "Not just history," Reality One replied, trembling. Then we end the simulation. Wipe all existence. If the universe must die to erase them, so be it. Valun agreed. They began charging the core collapse array, an ancient device hidden beneath the lattice of the Big Bang itself. If triggered, it would unravel everything. End of all. Blank slate. And then the stars began blinking out. Not dying. Withdrawing. As if the universe had chosen sides. As if it was finally done with architects, rules, order. As if the galaxy itself had said, "Let the humans speak." And in every shadow, every dream, every trembling ruler's heart, Earth whispered, "We were never the anomaly. We were the proof you feared. That something broken could become beautiful." The core collapse array pulsed in the cold silence between galaxies, humming with a power stolen from the birth of everything. It was ancient, forgotten even by the Empire itself, and only the architects knew of its existence. It wasn't a weapon. It was a reset button, a complete and final erasure of the universe. If triggered, all light, all time, all thought, everything would be swallowed by null. Even memory would fade. Not even the idea of human would remain. Core Valun stood before its core, bleeding from every eye, his form cracking. The infection had spread to him now. He could see faces in the dark, human faces. He heard lullabies in dead languages. His own thoughts whispered in English now. He wanted to scream, but all he could say was, "They should have died in fire." Behind him, the remaining architects circled the console. They agreed in silence. Earth had gone too far. It had become more than rebellion, more than infection. It was becoming dominant. A planet with no fleets, no true technology, no stellar reach, was rewriting godhood itself. The button glowed, and then it disappeared. One blink, gone. No detonation, no light, no explosion, just gone. And in its place stood a man, human, simple, quiet, wearing a stained hoodie, hands in his pockets, tired eyes, a crooked smile. "Looking for this?" he asked, nodding to the now missing core array, which pulsed inside his chest like a stolen sun. Valun took a trembling step back. You can't exist! You're not from here!" The man shrugged. "None of us are, really. We're just what you made, and what you forgot." He walked toward them, and the architects, beings who could erase species with a thought, ran. But there was nowhere left to run. Because Earth was inside everything now. Across the Empire, things collapsed. Not from bombs, not from invasion, from awakening. In the marble towers of Varaxis, noble rulers wept as they saw the face of their first murdered slave. On Juno 9, the ruling AI melted as it was overwhelmed by 1,000,000 whispered prayers from Earth's ancient wars. On a moon that had never known death, children were suddenly born crying in English. And in a dead star system, the bones of a forgotten species stood up and said, "We forgive you, humanity. Please forgive us." Earth was no longer rising. It had become the axis. In the hollow, Griggs and the barefoot boy stood before the monolith, which had now cracked into a gate. The first human stood there, waiting. Behind him, stars rippled like water. Griggs placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Is this it?" The boy nodded. "They either join us or end beneath us. There's no third path anymore." The 17 awakened returned, no longer bound to form. They were stories now, emotions wrapped in shape. They had walked through every culture in the Empire, whispered into every dream. They'd offered a choice, remember Earth, or repeat it. Some chose humility, most chose resistance. So Earth chose to finish the story. The first human stepped through the stars and stood before the last fleeing architect. Valun, once a god. Now a trembling old thing made of rules and regrets. I was trying to keep the galaxy pure, Valoon sobbed. Without chaos, without pain. You brought rot. No, the first human whispered. We brought the truth. And then Earth did something no planet had done. It forgave him. Not because Valoon deserved it, but because Earth no longer needed vengeance. It had already won. The galaxy changed. Empires fell. Planets healed. Children began dreaming in more than just their ancestors' images. They dreamed in the shape of Earth, of dirt, blood, fire, music, rebellion, love, broken families, unfinished poems. They didn't just know what pain was. They understood why it mattered. And floating at the center of everything now was Earth. Not the rock, not the geography, but the idea that suffering doesn't break you, it builds you, and no god, no empire, no architect would ever forget that again. In the hollow, where Earth first opened its eyes, the barefoot boy whispered his final words. Now they know. Dr. Griggs, finally at peace, closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The story was over, and Earth was no longer a trap. It was the warning label on the edge of the galaxy. Here be humans, survivors, monsters, miracles. Do not enter unless you are ready to change.